And so I want to begin by acknowledging that as I sit here today, I am on traditional Dakota land, and acknowledging that is one step to show respect, to affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and to stop the erasure of Indigenous people, history, and culture as we move toward more fully honoring the truth, which is so much the hope and commitment of this model. I also want to lift up and acknowledge George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all of the other lives stolen from families and communities and our world due to police brutality and state-sanctioned violence. Alongside also an acknowledgement and lifting up of the Black Lives Matter movement and other community efforts and uprisings to call us forward on a path of transformation. And so often when I present this work to audiences, people respond instantly. They're thinking about images that I'm about to show, which again, I want to name as activating images. People shout out the KKK. I think of neo-Nazis, tiki torches, some of these really overt symbols of white supremacy. And then my second question to audiences is regarding this next slide and the placement of my image here as one of the faces of white supremacy. Second, I also want to name Dr. Joseph White and his, who was considered the father of Black psychology and who gifted us this powerful framework regarding psychological strengths of African Americans, one of which includes a healthy suspicion of white people. And so again, a healthy suspicion of white people is this brilliant adaptation for navigating violent legacies of whiteness in this country and our world. And so when I connect myself to that, then I am reminded that people of color see me and don't know if I'm going to be the next white person who calls the police because a Black woman is sleeping in her dorm room, or who calls the police because people of color are barbecuing in the park. So again, connecting myself to that is a part of committing to respecting the ways that people have navigated to survive us. Lastly, I also want to just say, as Dr. Robin DiAngelo calls this binary thinking, one of the most effective adaptations of racism, convincing us that we are either good people and not racist, or bad people and racist, which means that we then can't have conversations about how good people are complicit in and perpetuate systemic racism and white supremacy. And so again, putting my picture here is part of breaking up that binary thinking and really asserting that all of us as white folks are implicated, we are complicit, we all have work to do, and no one is exempt, no matter our age, gender, political party, years in the field, etc. And so in our recovery frame, we're thinking of this as a spectrum of recovery, knowing that, again, all white people are here. Some days we are more courageous on the right side there, living out a commitment to act as an accomplice in dismantling systemic racism and white supremacy, and other days regressing on the journey toward, on the left, more overt white supremacy. And truly, day by day, moment to moment, our actions, again, determine where we're positioned on the spectrum. But we're here, we have work to do, and recovery says that we get to do that for the rest of our lives in a disciplined way, held in community. I want to begin by lifting up language from Bell Hooks, who describes imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy as the power structure underlying the social order. And I want to lift this up as this broad frame, affirming that our movements for justice and liberation must be intersectional. And I say that alongside the tension that today, as Dr. Ken Hardy asserts, it is sometimes necessary to focus singularly on race. And that is what we'll be doing today. This wisdom from Paulo Freire is reflected in what we have as sort of the closest thing to a slogan. And it's on our business cards here. It says, recovery from white conditioning, reclaim your full humanity. So this idea that there's something in us and that we have to work to, again, show up in the world in solidarity and fight for justice to be fully human. It's a group for white people to save themselves from themselves. And he proceeded to pull out this prayer and share with her, which I'll read with you now. Prayer for the white man. And now, grandfather, I ask you to bless the white man. He needs your wisdom, your guidance. You see, for so long he has tried to destroy my people and only feels comfortable when given power. Bless them, show them the peace we understand, teach them humility. For I fear they will someday destroy themselves and their children, as they have done so Mother Earth. I plead, I cry. After all, they are my brothers. And so we've now arrived at the moment where we're going to go ahead and share out with all of you what the 12 steps of recovery from white conditioning actually look like.
Step 1. We admitted that we had been socially conditioned by the ideology of white supremacy, that our minds were subject to racial biases, often unconsciously so. The first step to any kind of recovery is admitting that we have a problem. Individuals not ready to acknowledge a problem may be unable to pursue and receive the help they need. Becoming aware of a problem and admitting it to others can be challenging, but it is a fundamental step on the recovery journey.
Okay. Step 2, we came to believe that we could, oh, there's the sound. Here we go.
Step 2, we came to believe that we could embrace our ignorance as an invitation to learn. We acknowledge that we, as white people, will never know what it feels like to walk in the world as a person of color. We embrace our not knowing as a powerful reminder of our ongoing need for new learning, and we abandon white supremacist traditions of knowing how others should feel, think, and act.
How many of you have people in your network who say things like, I just don't understand why Black Lives Matter has to protest on the highway? And generally everyone raises their hands 99% of the time. And so when statements like that are made in a spirit of condescension and judgment, there's generally not an openness to new learning. I just don't understand why they do it, right? That's not a sincere seeking. If, however, a white person says, gosh, like, I don't have lived experience that informs me of a risk so great that I would put my body on the line and I would take that risk and get out on the highway. And so I have so much I need to learn. I wonder where I can go and seek that knowledge. The root is the same, the ignorance, the things that we don't know. Everyone gathers awareness throughout our lives. But if we commit to it in this, again, the spiritual foundation way, we can invest in that lifelong journey of learning.
Step 3, we developed support systems to keep us engaged in this work. We are aware that facing and recovering from the effects of white supremacist conditioning will involve difficult, sometimes painful moments. We will commit to developing practices that facilitate self-care to ensure that we are gentle with ourselves while also bravely able to confront the dehumanizing ideology of white supremacy.
Step 4. We journeyed boldly inward, exploring and acknowledging ways in which white supremacist teachings have been integrated into our minds and spirits. After acknowledging the problem, we must also acknowledge that it has impacted many areas of our lives, consciously and unconsciously. Each of us must explore ways, past and present, in which the ideology of white supremacy has negatively impacted us, our understanding of history, our social networks, and our patterns of interacting with people of color, with an emphasized focus on microaggressions.
And so step 4, a parallel to AA's searching and fearless moral inventory. Again, we're going to take a really deep dive, shine that light around, and study these patterns. So this is a sample step 4 worksheet, which again, all the PowerPoint slides will be sent to you after. So check it out. Also, I would offer my faith that many of you are aware of the term and definitions regarding microaggressions. If not, I think this is important to review in greater depth. But I included it also with micro in parentheses to honor something that Vanessa Jackson says, that I am just done calling them micro because they hurt. So I would also invite us as white folks to think about these as aggressions, insults, invalidations, assaults.
Step 5, we confessed our mistakes and failings to ourselves and others. Beyond identifying ways in which our thinking, feeling, and relating have been impacted by white supremacist conditioning, honestly addressing the actions that have emerged from that conditioning is a separate, necessary step. Confessing past and ongoing microaggressions to a group and receiving support is an essential part of recovery.
Step 6. We were entirely ready to deconstruct previous ways of knowing as they had been developed through the lens of white supremacy. After admitting these problems, white supremacist conditioning and related actions, it is then time to let go of knowledge developed in isolation from people of color.
Step 7. We humbly explored new ways of understanding, proactively seeking out new learning and reconstructing a more inclusive sense of reality. This step involves mindfully and intentionally engaging in learning to more deeply understand the experience of people of color in a society organized around white supremacy. This type of learning can take place in a variety of ways, including reading texts written by people of color, actively listening to the experiences of people of color, patronizing businesses owned by people of color, etc.
Step 8. We committed ourselves to ongoing study of our racial biases, conscious or unconscious, and our maladaptive patterns of white supremacist thinking. This step is about identifying our triggers to negative thoughts or other stereotypes, positive or negative, about people of color. We remain curious about the source of our thoughts, fears, and assumptions, and perpetually aware of their existence.
And so in this commitment to sort of systematically face and track some of our reactions, I would offer that much like we support someone battling depression and tracking their automatic negative thoughts, we can have that same level of discipline to really noticing what situations activate some of those stereotype thinkings in our minds or those racial biases, and then pay attention to the distress or just that the way that it feels in our body as we're again studying what keeps coming up for us.
Step 9. We developed strategies to counteract our racial biases. Developing positive associations to counter negative thoughts is an important, proactive strategy in recovery from white conditioning. We believe that a powerful way to develop positive associations is through authentic relationships with people of color. In lieu of such relationships, we can still engage in daily proactive practices to retrain our brain from the ill effects of white supremacist conditioning.
Step 10.
Step 10. We embrace the responsibility of focusing on our impact more than our intentions and interactions with people of color. Taking responsibility for the impact of our actions is an ongoing part of recovery. If we fall back into perpetuating white supremacist ideology or defending actions that have caused hurt to people of color, it is important to stop and admit it. Prioritizing impact instead of explaining the intent of our behavior, i.e., I didn't mean to offend you, is essential for attending to the human being in front of us.
So intent and impact. I'm sure, again, many of you have heard this and thought of this, but truly, if we, as humans, we will do harm.
Step 11. We engaged in daily practices of self-reflection. Reflecting on the day, on moments in which we confronted our own white supremacist conditioning, and on moments in which we were still bound by its limiting beliefs, is an investment in our recovery. Relevant spiritual practices may play a helpful role in this step, as a way to encourage us towards continued growth and connection beyond our mistakes.
Step 12. We committed ourselves to sharing this message with our white brothers, sisters, and siblings in order to build a supportive recovery community and to encourage personal accountability within our culture every day. Assisting others to seek help in recovery from white supremacist conditioning and in becoming an ally with people of color is a core component of recovery. Working with future recovery from white conditioning groups is a common choice for this step.
And so this step to me is really important. And this quote, I think, again, reflects the tension that white people need to absolutely seek out and pay for the emotional and intellectual labor of BIPOC folks who are offering us perspectives and guidance on dismantling racism and the actions we need to take 100%. And at the same time, we have access to white people in many spaces, in many ways, and we can, in fact, talk to them about race and racism, and we can cultivate those skills and that commitment to invite people in who are willing to learn and listen. We can go and commit, as Resma Menakem also says, go build healthy white anti-racist community. So those are the 12 steps, and I'm noticing that some folks are raising their hands, but so I want to acknowledge that I just saw that. And also we're getting closer to the Q&A portion. So I hope that you can send your questions to Joe, who's really strategically gathering them for us when we have just time to focus and dialogue. And so for anyone who's curious about how these 12 steps come to life in our current meeting structure, I wanted to just share the quick outline of how a meeting operates. We begin by repeating together the call to recovery, which is from a Kenyan author, Shailja Patel, who blessed us in using it. And so we say aloud, we are here to be fully human to ourselves, fully accountable to each other, and to each other meaning our brothers, sisters, siblings of color in this global family way. We then proceed with a welcome statement and introductions, announcements of any upcoming actions or trainings that folks should know about, along with passing the calendar because we have a rotating facilitator shared leadership style. We then host a minute of silence to center our hearts and minds on the lived experiences of our brothers, sisters, siblings of color, and Indigenous people, along with a quick reading about a white anti-racist who's gone before us as motivation to take real risk and fight for social change.